Okay, I think we've reached a lull in people coming in. And so let's go ahead and get started. So, welcome to our Wetlands Watches Lunch and Learn series. My name is Mary Carson Stiff. I'm the executive director of Wetlands Watch. Wetlands Watch is a nonprofit. We're based in Norfolk, but we work statewide on natural resource um, solutions to climate adaptation challenges. And we know so many of the people on the call, and so it's great to see a lot of familiar names. And if you want to show us your face, that's cool. But we understand it's lunch hour. Ian, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Ian T. Blair. I am the Policy Program Director, aka the new MC, and I get to share with you a General Assembly update for crossover. This is also my first General Assembly, so we get to learn together, and I get to share some fun and interesting, as you can see through the pictures, interesting experiences I have witnessed over the past couple of weeks.
That's awesome. Okay, great. So, our housekeeping things, per usual, we'd love to know who you all are. And so, if you could please change your name to your affiliation by hovering over the image of you or your name in the square, Hollywood squares, click the ellipses or dot, 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 and hit rename, add a comma, add who you're representing. Um, and that will help us as we engage in question and answer. And then also, if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, a simple "Hey, I'm Mary Carson Stiff, and I'm from Wetlands Watch" would be really helpful, and we'd love to get to know you better. So this presentation will be recorded. We'll have the recording available on our YouTube channel for those that missed out, and so thanks for coming. Again, please mute. We'll mute you. And then during Q&A, ask your questions in the chat throughout Ian's presentation. Feel free to do that. And then if you have a question that you'd like to ask during our Q&A, use the raise the hand feature and you can come off of mute. So we'll take your questions however you're comfortable giving them. And that's it. Take it away, Ian.
Awesome. All right. Welcome to our first Lunch and Learn of 2025. I've been sitting through a lot of subcommittees and committees. As you can see, some pretty cool moments here. We've got the Great Virginia Outdoors Act, which had a line of supporters just out the door, and then another of me just taking photos and listening to invasive species labeling. The General Assembly was off to a pretty turbulent start. Just doing a little rewind because so much has happened over the past couple of weeks. It's kind of hard to remember what just happened only a couple of weeks ago. Richmond had a water crisis, and that water crisis ended up delaying the General Assembly, which plays into an important role as the General Assembly in Virginia is a part-time legislator and it has different rules. I come from Texas, where the Texas legislature meets every other year for 140 days. And so I needed to catch up really quickly, which I thought was a really good segue to talk about. Let's just do a refresher. General Assembly 101. Like many other legislatures around the country, it's a bicameral system, aka it has two chambers, one which is the House of Delegates, that's made up of 100 members that serve 2-year terms. And just the political distribution in 2025, it's 51 Democrats, 49 Republicans, no independents. The other chamber is the Senate, and that's a 40-member chamber that serves 4-year terms. And that constitution is 21 Democrats, 19 Republicans, and no independents. The session timing is different if it's an odd number year, which is 45 days, 2025 being an odd number year. We have a 45-day session this time. Next year, which is an even number year, it's a 60-day session. And just those general responsibilities are drafting, making laws, amending the state budget, confirming gubernatorial appointments, etc. Noting that it is a part-time legislature, this is going back way back into the colonial times, and it got me in a rabbit hole of figuring out which legislators were part-time, which were full-time, and there's some resources, but essentially the part-time, when people report on that, is that it reduces costs to taxpayers compared to full-time bodies. So fun fact there. How, now that we know the Constitution of the General Assembly, how does that timeline work? Great question. We just passed crossover, which is when bills in one chamber cross over and the other chamber looks at those. So we are essentially like right around here in the timeline. The first part, bills are introduced, and so the clerk of the Senate and the Speaker of the House assign or refer bills to specific committees, and then those committees get reassign the bills to subcommittees depending on how they are made up. Those subcommittees here in the committee, they'll hear in the subcommittee. If it reports out, then it goes up to the committee. If it reports out, then it goes up to the chamber. The chamber is then read 3 times. If it goes through all of that, it gets engrossed, and then that's when the crossover happens. So that happens on the Senate side, and that happens on the House side. As someone who's new to the whole area, I've had to go and learn some language. I thought it'd be useful to share it with you here, just so that we're all on the same wavelength, and also you might need a refresher. So there are 3 types of main votes in Virginia. You've got voice votes, which essentially whoever is loudest wins. We hear this often when a substitute or amendment is being offered. The chair of the committee will ask, hey, do we have this? Someone will second, and then they'll say yay or nay or abstain. Recorded votes are actually recorded. They get recorded in the journal for each session. You can see who voted for what. They're more official as opposed to the voice vote. And then you've got en bloc votes where you'll just put a whole bunch of bills together and you'll vote all those bills as one single vote. All of these votes end up having specific actions. And if you are interested in legislative history or understanding what's actually happening right now, you can go to lis.virginia.gov. You can click and like search for bills or search for specific people. If your delegate or if your senator is putting forward legislation, you can see what legislation they're voting for or what they brought forward. But they all have specific terms, which may be sort of confusing for newcomers. As a former English teacher, I taught English in Ukraine and Georgia for 3.5 years. English is a difficult language because we have not complex tenses, but we have phrasal verbs. So to pass the House is a good thing. To pass by is generally a bad thing. And so by adding that preposition by kind of changes the whole meaning of to pass. So going and looking at what sort of actions these votes can do, we're going to start just going down the list. On the first one, carry over. Carry over can't actually happen in odd number years. They can only happen from even to odd number years. So we won't actually see that action in this current 2025 session. Laid on table, aka tabled, is just another way of saying the bill is defeated. If you sit through enough committees, you'll start seeing creative ways of saying tabling, where they'll use lots of adjectives to gently lay it on the table with feather-like pressure, just to try to have some respect and recognize that the delegate or the senator that brought forward the bill are politely declining that. Incorporate is when bills join up. So maybe one delegate had an idea, another, they both talk about it, they incorporate it, and they combine it. No action taken, aka left, is when a bill is potentially docketed or not docketed, it's maybe not even docketed. It is assigned a committee and then never gets docketed. And so it just sort of sits in purgatory, pending, waiting for something. If it doesn't happen at crossover, then it is just left, and therefore it's considered failed. Pass by indefinitely, potentially it can be brought up because this is such a short session. Essentially, pass by indefinitely is another way of saying tabled, which is another saying that the bill failed. With a little bit more caveat. This is different than pass by day, where maybe the bill is currently being worked on, the language isn't there yet, and so when it does get docketed in a specific order, the patron might ask to pass by it for the day, potentially hoping that the next committee meeting it will get redocketed so that they can present the full thing, which I've seen a couple times up in Richmond, watching other bills and watching the process go through, what everyone really wants, or what the patrons want, is they want to get a report, which means that it passes and it approves. And so there are three ways to report. You can report without amendment, aka it was perfect and it just goes through. You can report with an amendment, it's approved with changes, or you can report with substitute, where it's approved and the substitute is offered. And then the last two, re-referral. Sometimes something goes into a subcommittee. They might report it out, but they might re-refer it to another committee to look at. Generally, we'll see this happening with bills that have significant fiscal impacts. So they'll re-refer it to appropriations or some sort of money committee, finance and appropriations in the Senate, or appropriations in the House. And then strike is just when the patron no longer wants to carry it for some reason and asks the committee or the subcommittee to strike from the docket, and essentially it is tabled, passed by indefinitely, aka failed. So when you go and you look on LIS, these are the words that you will see to help you understand what's going on as that bill is going through the legislative process. Which brings us to, what are the stats? So when I looked on the 4th, there were 2,429 total legislative items being brought forward. Those include bills, resolutions, and joint resolutions. I only just looked at the bill size. There were 1,994 bills that were pre-filed and introduced in the 2025 session. I looked at the rates of passing. So the cumulative rate was 51%. It was slightly better in the Senate at 54, with only 50% pass rate in the House. On the right side, you can see some graphs. You might be looking at these graphs and being like, wait, these numbers don't add up. I didn't include any bills that were incorporated, and there were a lot of bills that were just quote unquote pending. So they had not yet failed. And that this is one of those pass by indefinitely. The bill gets assigned and then nothing happens to it. So it's just kind of floating there. So that's why if you're looking at the numbers and you're like, why don't they add up? I didn't include those. But you can see that there are a lot of bills. And as a newcomer looking at these, I was curious to know like what percentage of the bills that I was tracking, and that we will right now discuss what did that look like. So I started adding, while I was doing tracking numbers, some graphs to see like what's Lens Watch's priority and who are we looking at. It looked like Hodges ended up being the most, with 4 bills that we were tracking, followed with a tie of Hernandez and Bloxham that both had 3. If on the right side, we can see the bill status. Currently, 26 of them are still alive, 18 are dead, which is a 60% pass rate. And 31 were in the House and 12 were in the Senate. So the 43 bills that I was looking at was just 2.1% of all bills in the entire 1,994 that made it to crossover on the 4th. A lot of bills, but let's talk about some highlights. We're not going to go through all 43. We're going to look at around 10 that were most interesting to Wetlands Watch. The first one that we really have to thank the Chesapeake Bay Foundation for helping draft this language is HB 2034 from Delegate Simons.
It has already surpassed this number, so it's not.
Excuse me. Yeah, so for those who are unfamiliar, HB 2034 is creating a wetlands policy task force that's going to help develop strategies for wetland protection, restoration, integration. They're going to review policies both in Virginia and in other states, and recommend changes to speed up efforts to protect and create these, as well as investigate new science and innovations to ensure wetlands persist and thrive. We know, and I'm going to click forward just to show the findings from the Virginia Coastal Resiliency Master Plan, which let us know in this two-pager executive summary, 89% of existing tidal wetlands may be permanently inundated, effectively lost to open water, aka drown in place. We were fortunate enough to partner with a NASA developed team, which is this graph, and they use more up-to-date information. The Coastal Resiliency Master Plan Phase 1 was published in December of 2021. And this is from March 2024. The big difference from that 2021 report and the 2024 NASA developed is that the curve is a lot more steeper than we thought. Let me turn on my L. Initially, predictions were thinking it would be more linear. And so we're seeing a little bit more of a steep and then a plateau based off of their information. So having a interagency policy task force to try to prevent this from happening and slow down that loss is paramount, and one that we are watching as it is going through the Senate, as it is there now. The other thing is I've received questions, how is this different from Executive Directive 10, which came out in December of 2024? That Executive Directive 10 from Governor Youngkin is an internal work group within the Department of Wildlife Resources, but Wetlands Policy Task Force, and I included a screenshot from the Executive Directive 10, includes interagency, so it's DWR plus VMRC plus other state agencies plus academic institutions plus localities, and the substitute that was offered that then passed also includes the Farm Bureau as a named entity. And nonprofits, sorry. So HB 2034 is the one that we're happy it passed. Let's talk about some that didn't pass. So SB 1477 would have established a disaster assistance fund using RGGI for the purpose of addressing life, safety, and housing costs related to a disaster that are not covered by any form of federal assistance, private donations, or insurance. Disaster relief needs to be a little bit more comprehensive and connected to a more sustainable funding source. I think looking at the language itself is interesting. So I just took a screenshot from the introduced language. When you compare disaster assistance funds across the country, just naming North Carolina off the top of my head, North Carolina has 3 types of specific definitions for what constitutes a disaster, which helps identify where funding should be allocated without having a definition of disaster, because this is all the text that was introduced in the bill. It leaves a lot of questions unanswered. It also says that aren't covered by any form of federal assistance, private donations, or insurance. And we weren't really sure how that was going to be like actually implemented. How would you be able to understand private donations, which aren't generally in some sort of central database seeing how money is floating? So there are a lot of questions that we didn't know. This ended up getting passed by indefinitely 9-6 in the Senate. And we're looking forward to both doing some pre-disaster mitigation as well as thinking through more comprehensive post-disaster assistance in the future. HB 2348 was a bill very close to us. We were working with Delegate Hernandez in a work group to think about flood risk disclosure. This bill actually started in 2024 and got continued over. I guess it actually got sent to a letter to the Virginia Housing Commission. So, and then was reintroduced is the correct phrase. So essentially, Delegate Hernandez put forward HB 863 in 2024. It got tabled and sent to the Virginia Housing Commission, a series of meetings through the last throughout all of 2024, starting with a presentation in June, updates in September, and then the work group vote in November, and then it not getting a vote in December at the full committee of the Virginia Housing Commission. Delegate Hernandez went forward, was able to get some other chief co-patrons from across the strait. He got Delegate Clark, Delegate Moorfield, and Delegate Green. So there was bipartisan support for this flood risk disclosure. The essential summary was that this would be actual knowledge of real estate in FEMA designated 100 and 500 year flood hazard areas. So a rather simple bill. We care because having upfront information to communicate flood risk is super important going forward, and just making sure everyone has this information before they go into generally the biggest purchase of their life. I had an opportunity to look at how RAIN, the MLS system, works in the Hampton Roads, and there was a cool filter feature where you could filter different sorts of disclosures depending on if you wanted your realtor to like choose or work with you to figure out your future uh, house options. And if I knew, since flood insurance premiums are quite expensive, if I knew that I didn't want to live in a risky area, or if I didn't want to have that additional financial burden, I might, in a way, if we had a flood risk disclosure, ask my realtor to filter out, hey, just I don't want to be in a flood zone. I'm not interested in having flood insurance on top of everything else in this real estate transaction. That might make transaction processes easier for both realtors as well as potential Virginian homebuyers. Regrettably, this did not make it. It was tabled 7-1 in the subcommittee in consumer protections, which is sort of sad since the NRDC, this is from 2024, they released a flood risk disclosure, and they noted that Virginia has an F because they deem that there are no flood risk disclosure laws in Virginia. I'd say that we have a quasi one. We do disclose repetitive loss structures, but obviously that is a very, very small percentage of all real estate options in the Commonwealth. So it doesn't really impact a majority of interested home buyers. Also want to talk that FEMA released in 2022 model state requirements for disclosing flood risk during real estate transactions. And this was helped inform talking through different disclosures back in 2024, but ended up just going to that simple bill of just only actual knowledge of 100, 500. But right before the vote actually happened, NRDC had commissioned an independent actuarial firm, Milliman, to look at estimating undisclosed flood risk in real estate transactions, and they found out that Virginia ranks in their study area of 25 states. The total cost of flooding for homes sold, they're fourth, and they're fifth in NFIP paid claims, just as the count. You can see in the image that it is across the state. Hampton Roads does get hit the heaviest, but parts of central and northern Virginia are also up there in the standard actuarial average loss. So that we do not currently have flood risk disclosure. It didn't make it. We're thinking about ways and how to approach things in the future, but that will be after the General Assembly adjourns before we have any definitive paths forward. Those are the three big ones that we're looking at. The rest are just interesting ones that I sat through that I can add some commentary. Yeah, highlighting that fourth. HB 2000 and its companion SB 857. On the House side, that's Delegate Laffer. On the Senate side, that's Senator French. They both passed the House. There were some changes with HB 2000 with language, which explains the 11 votes against it. But essentially, it's updating Dam Safety Act to give DCR more authority in enforcing dam safety and managing dam failures. It also has a better inspection reporting policy. And connecting to my former regional flood planning experience in Texas, there are not all dams have the same catastrophic event if they were to fail. And so those small dams way out in rural roads, they were able to create a easier reporting inspection process, from my understanding, that would allow those private dam owners to inspect to increase compliance. For if they were to fail, they wouldn't hurt life, because they were super far out there. This is something that Texans in Western Texas had also decided on. So it's cool to see that sort of parallel happen. Why we care is that we keep seeing precipitation increasing, and so this is putting added stress on these aging infrastructure and making sure that we have the ability, or DCR having the ability to go and inspect, helps everyone close to these dam areas, as well as like the dam inundation zones reporting. HB 2077 and its companion bill, Senate Bill 1335. On the House side, that was Delegate Krizik. On the Senate side, Senator Marsden. They both passed their respective chambers. Simple ask. It's just including tribal communities' eligibility in the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. We recognize that flood risk is everywhere, and so initially they were included. Then there were some questions on interpretation, so they were registered ineligible, and this is hoping to get them back as eligible political subdivisions. So also rectifying and opening up access to an important climate resiliency fund. And so that was something that we were tracking. HB 1941, this was really early on. It passed the House. Delegate Siebold put it forward. If you remember from 2024, a similar bill was passed in the Assembly, but then was rejected. And so this was a change that didn't have a financial impact. I think it was a $100 fine, I remember, from 2024. This one is simply just labeling, hey, this is invasive. You might want to reconsider planting this if you're planting this outside. And then if those labeling doesn't happen, then a stop sale order can be utilized. And since we know that invasive species are a threat to ecosystems everywhere, and we are working by healthy native plant communities are critical for conserving biodiversity. So moving towards the native plant community, potentially through education and those nursery stores of, hey, this is invasive, can help nudge the public forward to that area. SB 1254, it passed very barely the Senate, 20 to 19, but essentially it's requiring cities that have greater than 20,000 people and counties that are greater than 100,000 people to adopt environmental justice strategies in their next comprehensive plan. And something, when I look throughout comprehensive plans, most often comprehensive plans are based on like land use planning, not necessarily on people. And so developing strategies to put people first in that planning process can help create a more resilient community. So we'll see how that's going to go in the House. We'll be following that closely. HB 1950 was going to create a living shoreline fund. And so just to clarify, it's not shorelines that were 1.5 miles. It had to do with fetch, which is the distance of water to the shoreline in any angle. And so what that means is that they would be really big living shoreline projects. And they would also be prioritized on public lands, and they'd be looking at wetland migration potential, which we know with the Coastal Resiliency Master Plan is needed with that projected wetlands loss, and that they would be in alignment with Coastal Resiliency Master Plan priorities. It got passed by indefinitely, which technically doesn't happen in the House. It just got passed by for the day and never redocketed. Passed by indefinitely just also is more on the Senate side. That's the language that they have chosen to talk about when a bill fails. But since these large-scale living shoreline projects are expensive, any financial support to incorporate nature-based features to mitigate coastal surge and coastal erosion are needed, considering changing climate and sea level rise. I don't think I put HB 2453, but Hodges, Delegate Hodges also had a similar bill. The only difference was, I think, the money attached to it. I think Delegate Hernandez had 5 million as a budget amendment, and Delegate Hodges had 20 million. But Delegate Hodges ended up just striking that from the docket, whereas in the, I guess more information, but when HB 1950, because I was ready to do public testimony at the day, it ended up getting passed by because Delegate Hernandez had an appointment and wasn't able to make that committee at that time, at that time of the committee, and so they passed it by and then just never got redocketed. HB 2059, this is one of the photos at the very beginning. It is Virginia's Great Outdoors Act. It directs a portion of the recordation tax revenues for land preservation, parking improvements. It had a huge line of supporters. It was actually quite beautiful to hear how different groups, because it was all across the board, who was supporting it. It was, and the amount of testimony was very passionate. Unfortunately, this was, again, passed by indefinitely. What they actually said is that they passed by for the day and then they wouldn't redocket it. The rumors that I heard in the General Assembly was just that there was no appetite for more natural resource funding. And I think this was like $20 million. But the compromise was that they would hear it, that public testimony would be able to be recorded in the process, and then they would pass it by for the day. And so we care from Wetlands Watch because open space preservation is essential for floodplain management. It's one of the best ways to mitigate riverine flood risks. And so there's also connection to the National Flood Insurance Program, community rating system, open space preservation points. And so having more land preserved could help communities that participate in the CRS get more points to reduce their flood insurance premiums. HB 2450, Delegate Hodges. Essentially, this was going to transfer the scientific advisory responsibilities from VIMS to this new entity called the Research University Collaborative, which is in code. It includes William & Mary, ODU, Virginia Tech, and Virginia Sea Grant. And it got tabled 7-2. We care. VIMS has been spending decades trying to collect both the staff and the expertise to help inform localities on coastal management practices. It didn't seem like there was a consensus mechanism in the bill. So if these 4 groups in this collaborative didn't agree with each other, what would happen? There also wasn't the permitting staff built into this research collaborative. And so I think there are a lot more questions that had with HB 2450 that could be answered both in and out of the subcommittee. And there were questions that were asked, and that was ultimately why it was tabled. HB 2212, and I forgot, but SB 1365, it's its Senate companion bill. It was going to roll back stormwater management regulations outside watersheds. I said outside watersheds, outside the Chesapeake Bay watersheds, so like the Southern Rivers. The intent, because I was listening in on the subcommittee and the parties that were supporting it, the concern was the high cost of compliance for these stormwater regulations, management regulations. It essentially would have created 2 different sorts of stormwater management regulations in the state that would be Chesapeake Bay informed and then Southern Rivers informed. And it was hoping to roll back these to a 2014 level of regulation, which, looking through and like just doing some research, was based off of land use data that was helping inform that pre-2014 from like the 90s. And so it wasn't up to date, and it felt like a step backward. And in here, the Marissa data has shown that precipitation rates have increased by 18% since 2006. So rolling back stormwater regs that use data from the 90s didn't seem like a smart move moving into a more climate resilient Commonwealth and looking at the future. And I think maybe if cost is a thing, a grant fund for specifically in the committee was a tennis court that they showed like this tennis court was going to be delayed. So that might be in lieu of in lieu of rolling back half the state's stormwater management regulations, there might be a financial mechanism that could support building tennis courts in the Southern Rivers watersheds. Ooh, budget tracking. So the governor released the budget in November. Member requests were happening up until crossover, and then the budget committees both approved some budget items that might be interesting, that were interesting to us, might be interesting to you, are listed here. A little bit over 500,000 made it to the approved budget committee on the House side for the VIM Sea Grant program. My understanding is that Virginia Sea Grant, Virginia is the only state that doesn't have a state-funded Sea Grant program out of the 34 states that I think participate in Sea Grant, which are all the coastal states. So this would be a nice step forward for having them to get more sustainable funding. There's another item that has George Mason University as the state climate office, state climatologist. It's just language. There is no budget or budget amount connected towards that. We saw that there's increased VCAP funding, which is the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program. This helps with riverine riparian buffers. And so Wetlands Watch recognizing that buffers are a way of slowing down water from upstream in upper watersheds. And we're supportive of that. There is also $750,000 for environmental literacy funding. When we compare similar states like Maryland and Delaware and how much money they are spending on their environmental literacy, Virginia is like just $2 per student, which isn't a lot. So while the 750,000 starting towards better MIWIs, meaningful watershed environmental experiences, is a good step forward. The big thing is that the stormwater locals, yes.
Sorry, Virginia only spends 30 cents per student.
Thank you, Lisa Renee. Yeah, does Maryland spend, where did the $2? That's absolutely from the CBF.
I think that's, I think Pennsylvania and Maryland spend $2, yeah.
There is a one-pager on environmental literacy that the Chesapeake Bay Foundation has put out that has these numbers on it. So look at them if you're interested in more information. That's where I was thinking from. Thank you, Lisa Renee. Stormwater Local Assistance Fund got $50 million. Big exclamation point there. Ooh, let me find my their historic preservation funding for BIPOC also got $2 million, and then deferred maintenance for state parks funding also got $20 million, but that's in the capital part of the budget. So that is budget that we're tracking. We will see what continues to move forward. A lot is still up in the air. Next steps, of course, we're going to see these bills get reassigned, re-referred to the respective counterpart chambers. So, for example, HB 2077, the Tribal Inclusion CFPF, is currently in the ACNR Agriculture, Chesapeake and Natural Resources Committee on the Senate side. And as that gets docketed, we update our tracker and see as we go through. So we will know as the adjournment of the General Assembly is expected for February 22nd. We'll know very shortly. What like the conferees for the budget will happen on February 12th, and then we have only a couple days left before everything gets wrapped up, or potentially that we have a special session. And then the governor has up until March to sign or reject any of these bills. Awesome. I'm right on time. So I will pause there before we announce our next Lunch and Learn and look at all the texts for questions coming in.
Yeah, we've had some great questions about specifically about the Living Shoreline Bill and the Wetlands Work Group Bill. And so just to hit the Living Shoreline Bill first, Jeff Corbin notes that the funding bill that so the Hernandez Living Shoreline and the Hodges Companion Bill ultimately failed, and he thought because of budgetary reasons, and that's absolutely right. The speaker has made it very clear that additional funding is going to be looked at very carefully, and Hodges pulled the bill because of his dissatisfaction with an administrative related issue, and the Hernandez bill ended up, not making it. And so I think that kind of like the elephant in the room here is the budget uncertainty. It is going to be very difficult for us to provide a comprehensive update on the budget at this time. It would already be difficult because we're in crossover. But what we know is that there was already uncertainty because of a lack of interest in spending. But the federal freezes and uncertainty related to federal funding has essentially blown up the budget process. And so it's just really important for our stakeholders and our partners to know that it's going to be very difficult for people to provide any kind of projection or hint of what could happen until we have a better sense of how things are settling. There is a great cost, and this is true for every state right now. There's a great concern that the Medicaid obligations would fall on the state to make up the difference from the federal government. And so our legislators are taking a lot of this uncertainty very seriously, and the budget is just a big old question. But for the Living Shoreline issue, just a big, a prohibition on additional spending. 98% of Virginia's shoreline is in private ownership. And so the state has really been directing people to the VCAP programming, as well as to the Virginia Revolving Loan Fund, Resilience Revolving Loan Fund, or Loan Fund. I'm sorry, I'm not saying that name correctly, but that funding source that came and sort of detached from the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, or CFPF, was intended to address the need to fund private property owners for modifications to their property structure or parcel to reduce flood risk impacts. So that's just a little bit of a tidbit there. And then lots of great interest in having the work group for wetlands planning be expansive to include a lot of state partners that are not included in the Governor Youngkin established interagency workforce, but could potentially be included in this alternative new work group that's intended to fill the gaps of those entities working on wetlands survivability and protection under climate change considerations that are not included in the state government. So there's a lot more flexibility in that work group, the way that the language is written in the legislation itself. And the idea is that it will be complementary and work in tandem to the extent that it is allowed to with the interagency task force that's looking at a similar thing. So hopefully that helps clarify. Any other questions? So we hit the two concepts in the chat. If people want to unmute and elaborate on what they said or respond to, my summation of it, that's great. Oh yeah, do we have a link to that we can put in the chat? CBF has all
Absolutely.
of their talking point or one-page docs that we can link to. The Virginia Conservation Network also has talking point docs for all the bills. Thank you, Lisa Renee. Any other questions for Ian? It's quiet on the call.
That's perfect.
Great job, Ian.
Thank you.
Okay, take it away, Ian. If any other questions come in, put them in the chat and we'll address them at the end.
Sure. So we have another, let me get forward. Our next Lunch and Learn is going to be about proactive planning for resilience. And Elizabeth Andrews will be presenting with University of Virginia Environmental Institute. She's going to give a step-by-step on how to proactively plan for climate change. And oh, snap, I have the registration link right here. I'll put it in the chat. 1 second.
So this is going to be a great Lunch and Learn. Elizabeth Andrews has been working on kind of this resource that is going to, if anybody's familiar with the Wetlands Watch Adaptation Guide, it's actually something very similar to that, but the emphasis is more on policy and law. And so this is a resource that is a really good compilation of a lot of the holes and analysis. And so please do join us. Elizabeth, has been one of our amazing voices and leading minds in the climate adaptation space since her leadership at the Coastal Policy Center at William and Mary Law School, and has since joined the UVA team and has still been working actively in the RAFT program, which is the Resilience Adaptation Feasibility and Design Project or Toolkit. And they are working at the local level with local governments that are tasked with the impossible challenge of adapting their entire community to climate change conditions. And so she has a lot of great anecdotal information. And this resource is a really nice compilation of a lot of those strategies and techniques. So we encourage you to sign up, put it on your calendar, and join us. Wetlands Watch has been using these Lunch and Learn events as an opportunity to talk about program work that we have going on. And we really want to take the opportunity to highlight the work of our partners. And so if there's ever anything that you want to be sure the stakeholders who are operational in this space know about, please reach out to myself or to Ian or to anybody on the Wetlands Watch team and let them know that you'd like for us to feature something that you're working on, because the only way we're going to really make a dent in this problem is to highlight all of our work and to get the message out there of what others are doing. So please just reach out. Ian, did you have any other slides?
That's all.
Okay, great. No other questions. You get 9 minutes back of your life. Thanks so much. We'll make the recording available online.
Thank you all.